Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Darwinism, Real Digital Transformation for Your Automation Projects. I'm Teresa Resick, the Director of Online Events here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's webinar. And with me today are Richard Medina of Doculabs and Greg Council of Periscript. Periscript is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. As we get started, just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows. Across the bottom of your screen is a list of all of the widgets we have available for you today. And group chat is available to you, and just open that by clicking on that icon that is along the bottom. And with group chat, you'll be able to text chat with each other, but also with a few of us from here at AIIM. Do ask questions of the speakers throughout the hour using the Q&A feature. We will hold them until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. But you can also use this feature to ask for technical assistance. Also wanted just to point out to look to the resources list, and that's to the right of the slide area. And then there are a few documents and links, and also a link to a really good ebook in there to help you learn more about the topic that we have at hand today. So just click in there at any time, and that resource will open in a new browser tab, and you can save it and read it after the webinar. And at the end of this webinar, a brief survey will open in your browser, and it's also in the widgets below the slide area. And I'd greatly appreciate it if you would take a few moments to offer your feedback and to suggest other topics for us to cover. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. And right now, I do want to introduce the speakers that we have with us today. And Richard Medina is a co-founder and Doculabs resident expert in information lifecycle management with knowledge of records management from all perspectives, people, process, and technology, as well as an understanding of best practices and how they apply within the real-world setting of the organization. With more than 22 years with Doculabs, Rich has worked with clients in many industries, evaluating the required management capabilities for their electronically stored information and providing recommendations to improve their discovery readiness and overall management of unstructured content. We also have with us Greg Council, and he's Vice President of Marketing and Product Management at Periscript. And Greg has over 20 years of experience in solution development and marketing within the information management market, including search, content management, and data capture for both on-prem solutions and SaaS. So before I turn things over to Greg, or turn things over to Rich Medina, we have a poll question for you. And so I invite everybody to come up to your keyboards and answer this lead-off question. We're going to have a few poll questions throughout our time today, so be ready to answer. And the first one we have up for you is, have you implemented document automation, and to what extent within your organization? And the choices range from having no document automation at all, yes, but under 25% of being fully automated. Yes, you have document automation, about 25 to 50% of your processing is automated. And then the next choice is that you have between 50 and 75% of automated documented processing. And another choice here is that you have about 75% automated documented processing. And the final choice there is that you have 100%, everything is automated the way that you want it to be automated. So if you just take a moment, answer your question here, and just looking to gauge where you are in your automation journey and how you're planning on this. And Rich Medina, I'm going to invite you to join me for a second, and as we go to take a look at the results here and see if what we're seeing with the representative crowd that we have with us today, if that's indicative of what you typically see with a consultant, with your client base.
Yeah, that's exactly what we see. So it's a slightly lopsided bell curve with most in the middle. And it's a few heavily weighted toward still lagging in paper. And so what we're seeing with most of our clients, who are typically the large financial services, insurance, and utilities, is they're trying to figure out what to do with so they've got a budget of money and effort and so on for the next 3-5 years. And what proportion should they give that to fixing their paper-driven processes right? Versus taking a long shot and trying to create completely digitized processes. So the idea is, do you do better OCR on paper, or do you try to move people over to electronic forms and e-signature and robots? And that's an issue they're all dealing with. So this is in line with what we're seeing. Congrats to the folks who are more heavily weighted towards the right side.
Well, Rich, go ahead and take it from here.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Greg, from Periscript. I'm sorry. I'm doing about 6 things at once. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about how to do automation as part of your organization's digital transformation evolution. Now, I often talk about digitization, moving away from paper, but now we thought it would be useful to talk about automation, like the flow rather than the work. And I'm going to talk about automation generally, but also focus on robotic process automation, RPAs particularly, since that's getting a lot of excitement and we're hearing lots of questions on how folks should use it successfully. There's a lot of words on the slide, but the 3 big takeaways I hope to provide you with are, first, that there are 5 approaches to digital transformation. So you folks should pick one for each initiative you're doing and pursue it appropriately. They're different. They require different tools and so on. You'll see what I mean in just a bit. Secondly, RPA, robots, is a good technology to adopt in particular cases, but be sure to plan and deploy it according to a broader plan for process automation as part of your overall digital transformation strategy. That is the mistake that many folks make, is just to go hard on robots, on RPA. And RPA is often just duct tape, and so you should be evaluating your other options that you have, whether it's collaborative workflow, document-centric workflow, business process automation, case management, and so on, AI, old-fashioned scripting, and so on, and choose selectively. And third, there are best practices for starting down the automation and RPA path, and I'll share some of them. And so these are from doing real engagements and pushing people down toward the right-hand side of that bell curve, the 6%ers or whatever they are. But let's start with how to approach digital transformation. Now, I should warn you that in my 15 minutes or so of this talk today, I'm going to be being at 100,000 feet and then gradually floating down towards nitty-gritty detail. Greg is going to be focusing on a lot more with nitty-gritty detail, I hope. And so I hope our 2 pieces dovetail together comfortably. Okay, as I indicated a moment ago, there are 5 approaches to digital transformation. And when we do these kinds of strategies and deployments, this is what seems to work for us. By definition, digital transformation occurs when organizations rethink their processes from a digital-first perspective instead of simply digitizing their paper-based processes. That is, applying OCR to paper and so on. There are 5 general approaches, as I said, and each one has a best fit. And at the risk of overextending a metaphor, I'll explain digital transformation in terms of house construction and transformation and so on. So let's start with number 1, the most bold approach, which is new build day forward. With this one, you've got no existing legacy process, so you can build new applications with, born digital, stay digital design principles and design an entire service and supporting applications from the ground up without having to replace any legacy technology or people or processes. And so you've got the advantage of using the most innovative digital transformation technologies and make the greatest changes and so on. And for each of these approaches I'm going to be talking about, there are pros and cons. I'll just point out a few of the most salient ones. This one obviously most dramatically puts your organization on the digital transformation path. You can use the best solution components and you don't have to throw them out, replace them in later phases, and so on. But they're the most highest risk projects, both during implementation and rollout. They're difficult to integrate with the rest of your organization, and it really requires strong vision and governance. When I talk about this first option, this new build day forward option, I'm thinking about you acting like a startup, like startup companies challenging traditional approaches to say, payments or lending or wealth management and financial services. So when you think about you're building your own in-house GoFundMe or On Deck or Prosper Daily or Intuit Mint or TransferWise. But most of us can't live such exciting lives and have to replace replace existing technologies and processes and so on. So the boldest we can be is number 2, the so-called raise and replace approach. And this shares many of the features of the first one, but you are replacing an existing process in place. Of the replacement scenarios, the 4, it is the most innovative, and you can make the greatest changes. It's the most dramatic lighthouse approach. That's the Gartner term. I like it. Well, a lighthouse is a project that's dramatically successful and draws converts. And it's the best opportunity for process design and so on. The challenge with it is that the costs and risks are extremely high because it requires a wholesale replacement of legacy technology and process. It's the most disruptive, and it takes time to do, so there's a high possibility of losing organizational approach. So many of us take do some of the other 3. And the first is the most tempting one, perhaps, and that is the outside-in approach. And that's where there's an existing process and you focus on the user experience by addressing user capabilities and not the underlying capabilities. It's like grabbing for the nearby candy rather than going for the vegetables. So you make mobile apps. You do some e-forms. You do everything that the customer experiences without fixing the underlying back office processing and so on. So those folks who have done it well, taking this approach, often create a middleware layer between the underlying applications in the back office and the user to give the appearance of improvement and hide the mess, kind of a tarp laid over the foundation while you're fixing that while construction is going on. So the pros for this is that if you do it right, it provides immediate improvement to the user experience, and the program risks are lower as a solution can be completed relatively quickly, and folks see immediate results. And the underlying technologies are often some of the legacy technologies you have, some of the AIM-related technologies like workflow and BPM and APIs and so on. And those are known quantities. You know how to do that stuff. But the cons are that oftentimes leadership loses interest in fixing the more complex underlying processes, which are the ones that are primarily associated with efficiency costs and so on, since those are the ones that do the work rather than the superficial customer experience technologies. And so that leads us to the next approach, which is inside out. And that is a case where there's an existing process, and it's the inverse. Rather than focus on the outside customer touching pieces, you focus on the underlying platforms or core or transactional business processes. So it involves maybe moving platforms to a cloud or outsourcing or implementing ECM or DING process management. So this is the biggest place where process management comes place, process automation and so on. It's a good long-term strategy, and if you do it right, it's a good preparation for then doing outside in. And going back to even 2003, when those multifunction devices rolled out, we saw the folks who were most successful, large enterprises, banks, who started using multifunction devices for enabling their agents or allowing the end user members, end customers to submit documents. The ones who succeeded best were not the ones who immediately rolled out the MFPs, MFDs, but rather bulked up their central processing operation and their ECM system and their workflow so they would be able to accept the influx of remote images coming in that were probably poorly scanned, skewed, require a lot of QA, a lot of error correction, and so on. This is that philosophy applied to digital transformation. And then the final one is what most of us do, and that is the incremental opportunistic renovation. You can't build a new house from scratch. You can't build a new house and raise the old one. You can't do the outside of the house completely or do the inside plumbing completely. So you fix the bathroom or you fix the closet and then you fix the kitchen and so on. And just do it incrementally and opportunistically. It's the most conservative approach, and it's better than continuing what you're doing now. That is, if you're using just legacy approaches and so on. And it's often the best initial approach for you folks for if your organizations are risk averse. but there are going to be no dramatic so-called lighthouse digital transformation improvements. And though it's better than doing nothing, it's not a successful long-term approach. You can't get completely there from here. You're going to have to use one of the other approaches and get off the incremental opportunistic bandwagon, as it were. So having said that, giving you the 5 approaches, my conclusion would be, look at your organization, select an approach to use for each opportunity you identify, because each one differs, particularly in which capabilities and tools you should focus on. And also whether automation even fits in, and if it does, whether it's RPA or BPM or something different. But now let's look at the capabilities that are required for digital transformation, one of which will be process automation and RPA. Now, a very useful approach to thinking about capabilities and technologies for whether it's enterprise content management or digital transformation is to use a reference model like this that classifies and buckets the relevant capabilities and tools and products that are used for the initiative and so on. You've probably seen these for ECM if you've been a member of AIIM for quite some time. This is one for digital transformation. The one we use, we found it to be effective. And as you can see, I've inserted Periscripts where they belong, and I'll mention some other vendors just to give you some context. And I'm just mentioning examples, so I'm not recommending anyone here. And I'm going to be mentioning mostly new logos, new vendors, rather than the ones that you're mostly familiar with, the ones that have been around for years and so on. So with ingestion, you've got folks like Periscript and Effisoft and FormStack. For user experience, you've got Microsoft, you've got Slack, Salesforce. For sharing and communication, you've got folks like DocuSign and Conga and Twilio. For process management, that's most relevant to us, you have Periscript, but also Microsoft Flow and Workato and Blue Prism and Automation Anywhere and Pega, all of whom provide RPA as well as BPM. I'm sorry, Pega provides BPM. For content repository management, you've got folks like Box and SpringCM and SharePoint, Microsoft. For information and data management, you've got file analytics vendors like FileFacets and ZLTech. For security and identity management, you got folks like Okta or Microsoft Active Directory Federation Services. We're almost done here. I'm just giving you examples. For integration and migration, you got folks like ShareGate and SkySyn. For artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is applicable to every box. That's why it's over there off to the side. You've got folks like Periscript, but also names you might have heard of like Google and IBM Watson and Amazon Web Services. And then for business services, it's a garbage can category. Everyone from Experian and FICO and Checker and so on to regular service bureaus, BPOs, and so on. So those are the vendors, but let's try to civilize this so that it looks like an awful mess. And when we talk about kind of the reference model for capabilities for digital transformation, we bucket them into 4 groups. User experience, which is the top area. Information and process management, which includes most of the AIIM categories. So it's the one that's closest to ECM. So it goes ECM and workflow, BPM, and case management and RPAs. That's where automation and RPAs live. And then digital transformation infrastructure. So this is the plumbing that you need for digital transformation. That's different than the old world pure networking or client server technology. And then finally, business services that include everything from outsourced simple capabilities to more specialized vertical services like credit checking or financial services and so on. So now we ask, how do these capabilities fit into the 5 approaches? See, so we're parachuting down, we're getting down lower until we're going to hit RPA specifically. There we are. And what you find is, if you're going to be ambitious and do a new build day forward, just do something dramatically new, all of those capabilities are relevant. You're going to have quite a shopping list. If you do raise and replace, also all of them are relevant, and you're going to have to decommission your old solutions and so on. So you'll probably need some records management and archiving capabilities in addition. If you're doing the renovation from the outside in, you're going to be focusing on the user experience layer and often with some business services. And if you're renovating from the inside out, you need the plumbing. And the plumbing consists of, obviously, the digital transformation infrastructure, possibly, if your organization doesn't have that, but also the information process management, which, again, is the are the AIM, specific AIM technologies for information management, process management, like process automation, BPM, case management, and of course RPAs. And then finally, if you're just doing it slowly, incrementally, opportunistically, you'll be focusing on user experience, the the AIM technologies, info and process management, and then sometimes business services. But it would have been easier if I had just said what you're not going to be using is digital transformation infrastructure. That would be far too costly and so on if you're just renovating piece by piece. Okay? So what you find is that process management, process automation, is relevant to 4 out of the 5 categories, 4 out of the 5 approaches. And I just offered this slide here. I'm just going to wave my hands at it for you folks to take home or whatever as you're planning out your roadmaps. One question is what you're going to renovate or build new, as what your project is going to be, the material, the content of your project. And that's what I just talked about, the 5 approaches and what technologies you need. But another question is how you plan and put such projects into your roadmap, whether you're just doing a proof of concept or a pilot, or you're doing some bold projects, or you're doing a redesign project by process by process, like putting in a subdivision, house by house by house, or whether you're doing a complete enterprise redesign program, in which case you're going to be doing plumbing for the whole town and the electric grid for the whole town and so on, to just belabor this metaphor. Again, I'm not going to go into this in detail now. If you have questions, let me know. But that's part of how you should design your roadmap when you think about digital transformation and how RPAs and process automation fit in. So now I'm going to switch gears and focus on process management, process automation, and RPAs. And Greg is going to address this in more detail and more systematically, but I'll just give you a quick cheat sheet here. So RPAs are one subset within process management, and a subset of process management is process automation, where there's no human-to-human or human-to-machine, or little human, it's mostly machine-to-machine, straight-through processing. And there are 4 kinds of technologies, plus or minus. There are a few more that are most relevant. And here you have them here. So the macros are scripted automation. You're familiar with them if you've been around for decades, like they have, and they're brittle, they're old, and so on. And then you have BPM, business process management, which is very comprehensive and is best used for large-scale deployments and transformations. It requires a lot of process redesign, and so it can become complex and expensive. It's kind of like inheriting a giraffe. There's a lot of complexity that you have to deal with, but it can be, I guess, rewarding. And then the next one is our hero for this talk, which is RPA. RPA is still young but quickly maturing, and it's best used, as Greg will explain, for repetitive and rules-based tasks. Significantly more sophisticated evolution from macros and scripts. It's often deployed tactically as point solutions, standalone, duct tape repair, or in conjunction embedded with BPM or case management. And then finally, artificial intelligence is a young to medium maturity technology and evolving. It's best used in complex content-heavy processes. Today, it's often limited to particular domains. It's often, if you don't know what you're doing, it's not worth pursuing, but it can be worthwhile in particular areas. That's my slightly cynical approach. Whenever you're addressing RPAs, we strongly recommend that you do it in the context of a process management, process automation plan for the enterprise. So you know which tools to use, you know you're following the right steps, you're not missing any steps, and so on. And so how should you deploy RPA and automation? You may end up only rolling out RPA rather than BPM, but you should include the other process management technologies into your plan, if only to evaluate and reject them. So deploy RPA as part of a broader enterprise automation strategy that may be part of your enterprise digital transformation roadmap. We found using frameworks like the one here, which are really just glorified checklists, are the best way to think about complex disciplines like digital transformation and enterprise automation. The framework, like this one here, should include the individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions for success. The idea being, if you plan and manage your rollout using this framework, you'll be successful. And I'm not going to go into detail here. You can see the different pieces, but they include having an overall strategy that kind of prioritizes the other pieces, defining what capabilities you need, what technologies and products fulfill those capabilities, how you're going to govern and operate those capabilities, how you're going to budget for, plan, and justify your program financially wise, how you're going to develop and deploy all the different pieces, and how you're going to ensure that your organization is ready for all the changes so you can sustain the initiative. Now, I've talked about digital transformation. I've talked about automation and RPAs at a general level. So I'm going to do the third thing, the third takeaway, and that is share some tips, I guess, that we've learned from doing these kinds of initiatives. So that is from the framework-based roadmap that we talked about. So here they are. First, form a center of excellence, some kind of governing structure. You're probably familiar with those for ECM or already with workflow or records information risk management. But have a COE, a center of excellence, a governing body, and make it IT heavy, but also include the early business unit enthusiasts for proofs of concept. And these may be from lines of business, or it could be like typical early adopters of this stuff like call center. And if you are doing a pilot or a lighthouse type project or other stepwise approach, you might start by focusing on only one line of business or a business unit like call center. Don't make it too complex. What does your government structure look like? Well, typically, they almost always follow this path. They start out with automation with a decentralized model, different campfires being lit around the woods, which is okay, but then plan to move to a centralized model, and that will evolve to a federated model with a central center of excellence sharing responsibilities with the lines of business, which function like franchises. If what I just said did not sound like English, my coworkers feel for you, and I can explain it later or in a phone conversation. Now, the next issue is if you're taking this POC or pilot approach, start with a small number, and then, and this is very important for sustainability, define IT guidelines and standards. This is the rules for expansion. And so this will control not only how you deploy the RPAs, but also overall how you govern the whole deployment for process automation and management. That is, if you need rules for if the opportunity looks like this, then do this. If it looks like this, then don't do that, but do this. That will help you choose the right tools for the right processes. So you don't use RPAs when you should have used BPM or used neither or used SharePoint or something different. And then finally, regarding what opportunities to pursue, first and second and never. Do an inventory of your opportunities that can be addressed with RPAs or other type of automation, and then prioritize which ones to do first or later or never using the following criteria. Use buckets like, for RPAs, the processes that are generic, like transferring files or fetching files, those that are activity specific, like in capture operations, whether a document set is complete and somewhat correct, whether it's in good order or not, and those that are industry specific, like so-called traceability in manufacturing. And then note that have this duct taped wherever it needs to be or on posters. RPA should not be the default solution. It is duct tape, so look at other options first. Sometimes you need an arc welder, sometimes you need a screwdriver, sometimes you need duct tape. This RPAs are a great duct tape. And then finally, note that automation can be full, replaced in a full-time equivalent, or assisted. And look at, don't downplay assisted automation. That is where the RPA provides a hypothesis or some options that the human worker selects from. Often that's a necessary first step before you go to full automation. And then this is the final slide for me. Note that the best cases for RPA are high headcount, lots of people, very manual, and they have these characteristics. They're typically rules-based, simple to moderately complex. The processes are stable and mature and documented, and the documents and data is structured or at least semi-structured, and the user interfaces are typically web or old-fashioned thick client. Those are the easiest ones for prioritizing. And then you've got a decision tree in which there are 5 basic cases. Either the process that you're looking at is broken or it's in good shape. If it's broken, you might leave it alone because it's low value, high risk perhaps, low risk to keep it alone, or redesign it if it's high value, high risk, but note that it'll be a big project. Or third, you can use RPA duct tape. Now the process is in good shape, you can leave it alone because it ain't broke, or you can use something more complex than RPA to improve it, to do even more automation, say using BPM or artificial intelligence for straight-through processing. And with that, I'll hand it over to Greg from Periscript. Greg?
Well, actually, this is Teresa. I'm going to pop in the middle here before Greg comes on because we have another poll question for everyone. So again, come back to your keyboards, answer this question for us. If you do use automation, what type of document accounts for most, and that being more than half of your automation? Are they structured forms, semi-structured forms like invoices, unstructured documents like contracts, emails, and things like that? So just looking to get a bit of a pulse point of the kinds of documents that you're currently juggling within your organization. So now I'm going to ask Greg Council from Periscript to join us here and take a look at the results here. And looks like we're right up the line here. I'm kind of surprised that people didn't tag that unstructured documents is that it's what it counts for.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, I'm quite surprised at the relative percentage of semi-structured documents to the more traditional and you could almost say easier handling of structured forms. And unstructured documents could be probably more in the contract area, but maybe also with email correspondence and trying to process these maybe through full text search. But these types of responses always want me to dig into more and say, what are you actually doing? And unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of time for that. But so I'll go ahead and move into my portion of the presentation, which, as Rich alluded to, is going to take you into a little deeper dive into automation, specifically document automation, and some of the kind of factors that influence any type of successful project. I know for a lot of people on this call, and probably just about anybody that's within an organization, it almost seems unfair that there's so many technologies foisted upon everyone, and just when you feel like you're getting the handle of one, yet another new silver bullet comes about. And I don't think we have any kind of ambiguity around what Rich thinks about RPA, right? Duct tape. But really, why does he consider that to be the case? And the reality is that RPA is really more of an evolved solution to take the place of what we typically would create via scripts and things, more programmatical types of artificial intelligence. So it's a very, very rules-based approach. The difference is it's a modern take on that rules-based approach where you're creating these process scripts and then you're creating routines in a much more user-friendly manner than what traditional programming would allow. But as with any kind of rules-based approach, the rules must be followed without exceptions. If you have exceptions, it's really hard to plan for every single one, so you really code to the happy path, which leaves more complex processes pretty much out of scope. That's where the cognitive piece of it, or artificial intelligence, really enters the fray, because it allows you to extend this kind of it's not a crude approach, but more of a rules-based approach with something that's a lot more adaptive and flexible. And we call that pretty much the processes that really help with RPA or any other type of automation, more like a reinforced learning type of process. So what does that look like? This level of machine learning, specifically reinforced learning, typically parses and analyzes real-world outcomes in order to optimize the system overall. The most obvious would be tracking exceptions to any kind of predefined rules. So let's take a case where you've got some sort of rules-based approach, whether it's RPA or not. You're coding for the happy path, but there are always exceptions. What do you do with those? The most typical approach is to hand them off to a person or staff to review and then make corrections. What a simplistic reinforced learning process would do is examine those types of exceptions and then identify areas where rules can be adjusted. But this is, again, more of an extension of a rules-based approach. The goal of machine learning is to automate a lot of that and to create what is called a model, where we're not really creating explicit rules that can break, but rather it develops a model that is much more flexible, and it refines it through continued monitoring. So this level of configuration offers the most flexible, adaptive mechanism for automation. So when we approach a process that includes or involves document-based information, and when we want to apply cognitive automation, you really have to take a step back and look at the process and look at the information that's involved. Typically, the information, when it's document-based, can be organized in one of three categories. The structured document, otherwise known as a form, that can be highly standardized, although we have seen at Periscript plenty of examples where there's variation even within standardized forms, or there may be just so many forms that you have to take a different approach. But typically, structured forms are documents where you can reliably identify the location of the data. Then we move across and we talk about semi-structured documents. Now, in some groups, semi-structured and unstructured documents are kind of treated the same way, but the real difference with semi-structured and unstructured documents is, let's take the invoice. A semi-structured type of application would always look for the same information, but the location or the style or the data type of that information can vary from one type of vendor or one type of organization to another. Whereas unstructured documents, in a lot of cases, you're not really sure what information and what format you're looking for. So that's typically, depending on the application, one of the most complex types of documents to process. So moving and talking about configurations, because this is really important, is just like RPA, the most traditional methods for automating document identification and corresponding data extraction were to use rules-based methods. In the case of structured forms, the easiest and most reliable method was and is to use what are commonly referred to as templates. And templates involve the rules that dictate to the system exactly where those data fields are located and what types of data elements and what their names are. So by being very explicit, you're able to get typically a high degree of performance. Moving to a more complex form of rules would be the use of pattern matching, such as using regular expressions, or use of keywords and value pairs. So you're looking for and hunting for a specific keyword, and then you're telling the system where to look in proximity to those keywords. Now, this type of approach became a lot more common to handle those types of semi-structured data like invoices or receipts or bills of lading, but still could be just as brittle as templates and even more to program, because if you don't account for the high level of variance, then you're going to increase the amount of exceptions that are handled manually. So to tackle the complexity of those rules, or to improve the level of automation without a whole lot of manual intervention, the market several years ago introduced a knowledge-based type of approach that allowed more educated users or special types of users the ability to tell the system the types of documents and locations for any of the data that was not able to be automatically processed. What this would do is it go back into a knowledge base or relational database that stored that information. So ideally, the next time that specific document presented itself, it could be more automated and flow straight through. But there are performance penalties, both in terms of accuracy and throughput, even with this model. So when we approach an automation project, AI actually encompasses all types of automation, from the more strict templates to more flexible rules-based approaches. But there are many different levels of applying automation. Here's one view we call the capability maturity model when it comes to document automation. So at stage 1, simple document conversion is applied with the objective of reducing paper and storage costs. So this is not digital transformation. So the idea of converting a document, a physical document into an image is only almost step 0 or stage 1. But you get the benefit of reducing storage costs. You might be able to apply full-page OCR or enter in metadata so you can ease the access of documents in other types of workflows. But when we move to stage 2, we can automate some of the processes of extracting metadata, most typically for structured documents because they are generally the easiest to configure. And then moving to 3, we look at introducing additional automation, reduce manual efforts around identification of those documents, or in some cases sorting through those documents. And then at stage 4, we apply those rules-based methods to locate information that may not be always in the same place, so handling things like invoices or bills of lading and things like that. And then lastly, at the tip of that pyramid, we move to a completely machine learning-based approach. And the benefit for this is it can handle all document types. And realistically, an organization can be at any of these different types of levels of maturity. It really depends on the process that you have, the level of sophistication, the level of technical skills that you have available. So most of this is due to the relative cost and complexity of moving up and down the pyramid. So one department may be at stage 2, while another one may be all the way at stage 5. It really just depends. And where would I be if I didn't cover some of the more machine learning types of technologies and things? Because machine learning is not just one technology. It's about a number of them, mostly based upon statistical methods. So what we do is we'll look at things like, and you can look these up in Wikipedia or just Google them, things like naive Bayesian or use of neural networks or support vector machines and things like that. All of these are variations of learning technologies or algorithms that need data and then can make inferences, which we call models. The key is that you intelligently apply one technique or one machine learning model to the task where it performs the best, because they don't always do well with different types of data. Then we have the types of modes of machine learning, from supervised, which is essentially a person telling the machine what to do, but instead of creating brittle rules, it will create these types of inferences or abstract models, all the way to the unsupervised type of model where the machine learns on itself. And we're starting to see more and more evidence of the realistic applicability of unsupervised models, but in special ways. And then we have reinforcement models, which are really kind of a mixture of the two. So you provide some sort of data into the model, into the machine, and it creates a model, but then it uses errors and exceptions to be able to learn and adapt and improve. And the really cool thing is that, again, machine learning is not just one type of silver bullet. You really have to apply it to a given problem. So it's really important to understand what specific tasks you're trying to automate, and then understand through somebody that's well-versed in these technologies what is the best approach to take. So lastly, let me just flip you through really quickly an example of how you would apply more of a machine learning type of automation to a process. So when we look at document-oriented business processes that use machine learning, when it comes to transformation, the key is to look at your existing process from a variety of angles, such as the customer experience, efficiencies you want to gain, compliance you need to improve, and potentially several other factors that are important to your organization. Then you need to identify the ideal process, so how that process should be, and there you'll be able to find the gaps so you can map how that transformation can go about. So using a onboarding type of scenario, the goals might be you want it to be quicker from a customer experience perspective and less painful process for them. But internally, you want to improve compliance and efficiency. So if RPA or any other type of process automation is going to be successful in these more complex document-oriented processes, the ability to reliably work with documents without a significant amount of manual intervention is essential. As you can see here, a machine learning approach to document automation can support this mandate from the ability to automatically learn document types and then go about its work without having to seek help from a person, all the way to being able to verify that the data that is extracted is accurately passed through to the system, and only the data that is actually not able to be found or is erroneous gets sent to an exception queue. But the real key here is that the data exhaust from the process itself is always scrutinized to understand where adjustments need to be made. It's very much like having a process improvement engineer overseeing all the work and making adjustments as you go along. So this is where we get into what specifically is special about Periscript and why we are here talking about this. So when we're talking about how we move from here to there in terms of successfully applying machine learning, especially for document automation, that's really the focus that we're taking at Periscript. And we've been using advanced machine learning at the center of everything for well over 25 years. But the key here is intelligently applying things like neural network technology to successfully solve problems. And we've been doing that even when it wasn't considered cool. Now it is. So our latest release, Form Extra AI, has at its core a self-learning system that we call smart learning, because it's able to take your production samples and automatically configure itself using, including optimization for accuracy. So you're not only getting a system that is ready to go in production in a much quicker state, but you've got it already tuned for you. And once into production, it examines that workflow data in the background to continue to refine, adapt, and improve. And the ultimate objective for everything we do here is to provide the highest possible performance, but without the complexity and cost. Those are the keys that really enable project success. And underlying that, these are the keys right here that you see that enable us to handle any type of document. So it's an intelligent application of machine learning to be able to process any document, any data within a single workflow, and automate not only the upfront configuration, but also the production operation, so the watching over a process and ensuring that it can adapt and evolve and improve. And that's the solution piece. So at that point, I'll turn it back over to Teresa.
Thank you. And I have great contact information up here. And we have one more poll question for you before we go to take questions from the audience today. And so just want to come back to your keyboards, please. If you use automation, what type of techniques do you employ most with your document automation? Do you use structured templates, rules for things like keywords and regular expressions, machine learning, or is there some other type of automation that you use? So tag your answer here, and if there is some other kind, feel free in Q&A to list out what that other kind of automation that you employ. So that would be helpful for us. And while y'all are answering that question right there, just want to let everyone know, we have been recording the webinar, and my apologies for not having a PDF of the slides available for you today. When we send the link, we'll send an email later today for the replay information. I will have a link in there for you to download the PDF of the slides. So you will definitely get all of this fabulous information, this contact information. Kate will get you all squared away, and we'll make sure we get that into your hot little hands. So Greg, before we take questions, just want to take a look at the answer to our poll question here. For the folks who are using automation, the techniques that they most employ, it looks like rules-based is the most extensively used one that we see here. Is that like about what you were expecting to see as well?
Yeah, that certainly tracks with the previous poll question where you're handling more semi-structured information versus structured. Really, a practical application of rules is the only way to tackle that. Otherwise, you're creating a number of different, potentially thousands of structured templates. So that doesn't surprise me. I would expect that machine learning is starting to get into the double digits, the low double digits, like 10, 11, 12, 15%. But still, it reflects people are experimenting with the application,
which is always a good thing. So yeah, do want to take. We had some questions that have come in, and we're going to take one right now. And I'm actually going to start this off with Richard Medina, and then Greg, please feel free to join in. But someone is asking, how can they be sure that they're choosing the right document automation solution for their business? I know there's so many factors that go into this, but just some tips or pointers or suggestions to help them ensure that they're on the right path there.
Yeah, so what we saw from some of the survey responses is that most of you all or most of your clients or customers have 1 foot on the dock and 1 foot on the boat. And so they're both doing old, paper conversion, paper automation, as well as trying to move people over to a fully digital-first platform situation. So you've got to be able to address both worlds. That's fact number 1. Fact number 2 seems to be it does not work if you do kind of a Frankenstein solution and just pick, for each of those boxes in my reference model that I showed, pick 3 for each of those boxes. Best approach typically is to choose kind of a platform vendor, a core vendor that does a lot of the core stuff, and then supplement it if there are gaps. And so that's the approach that would be a kind of a default solution. And coincidentally, Periscript fits into that kind of as a core platform where it can do both old world and new world, or both dock and boat as adequately.
And Greg, your thoughts on
my
this
first cut.
question?
Yeah, yeah. Is it such a coincidence? Is it such a coincidence, Rich? So, but I think that if you listen, and surely, hopefully, you have everything that Rich has been saying is to take a pragmatic approach, look for. Really understand what the processes are that make the most sense to automate, and then look at a practical or pragmatic way to get from A to Z or even A to B. So it's really not any different for a document, specifically for document automation. The projects that have the best results are the ones that start with a clear understanding of what the document types that are involved, and specifically what the requirements are. Not only from a what data or what do I want it to do, but how well do I want it to perform, and understanding that there is no such thing as a perfect system, so you will get some errors, and how are you going to handle those? But once you have a good understanding of what you really want to achieve down to specifically where the data elements, then you go about looking for something that can adequately solve that problem. So I think that the pursuit for complexity or a solution that can do everything is a tendency that we all have. I think we do it in our daily lives, but it's not really the best approach. It's starting small, starting simple, finding something that will solve that problem. And then I think there was one of the slides that Rich said, plan centrally, plan something small, but with the idea that you can cookie cutter and do some other, and start to expand it to other types of similar processes. So again, to take it from an atomic level, look at the specific requirements, and then match what those requirements are to a solution that can really meet your needs.
Thanks. Just want to mention, obviously there's a lot to learn and a lot to tackle in this, and just want to offer out to you that AIIM does provide instructor-led training as well as online self-paced classes. And so you can take deep dives, take some quick study offerings, but we can also arrange to have a trainer to come to your place of business to provide a custom perspective of our instructor-led programs. So information on all of our training programs that we offer here at AIIM can be found at aim.org/training. So I encourage you to take a look and to see what a little bit more in-depth training can help you as you learn more and work to automate and get things running smoothly in your organization. And we are at the end of our webinar time right now, and just remind you that we have recorded this. We will send you the link for the replay as well as the PDF of the slides. Don't forget the resources. There's a great tip sheet in there on Digital Darwinism. Encourage you to download that. Take the survey. It's going to open when the webinar is done, but it's also in the links at the bottom. Very much want to thank our underwriter, Periscript. Without the support from our solution providers, AIIM would not be able to bring you these free educational programs like today's webinar. So thank you very much, Periscript, for your sponsorship. It is appreciated. And with this, we're going to bring the webinar to a close, but want to leave you with our speakers' closing thoughts or key takeaway. And I'm going to start first with Greg Council of Periscript. Your closing thoughts today.
Yeah, I would kind of riff on what a major theme that Rich would have, but also augment it with something around the technology piece itself. There's a lot of discussion around AI or machine learning and things like that, but it's really about the practical approach and application of machine learning to a given problem. So again, the key to success is to understand to very, very well define the process and the current state and the future state, and then to map those gaps and then to seek the appropriate technology, but also to start simple. Don't try to take on a huge, very, very complex project when you're starting to just get everything underneath you and learn everything. So again, it's start simple, then move on.
Thank you, Greg. And Richard Medina of Doculabs, your closing thoughts today.
Yeah, sure. With this digital transformation and process automation projects, it's a little bit different than most of the projects that we do. I'm using us as an example. What we find is that as part of the initial, the current state, the first phases of the project, it's extremely useful to do, and I hate to use this word, but visioning exercises. That is where you lay out the possibilities and the pros and cons of the general approaches. That is, should you do it, you can do it incremental, opportunistic, or you can do a complete raise and replace. You can do a roadmap with POCs, or you can do kind of like building a subdivision, just to hit one process and the second process and the third process and so on. And then kind of the differences between RPA versus BPM versus case management, which we didn't talk about. So people know what the playing pieces are and so where you should move them and so on. For this kind of initiative, digital transformation, process automation, this seems to be extremely effective at the very beginning of projects, where it's not really necessary so much for generic ECM or capture projects. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I do appreciate you taking this time out of your busy day to join us. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you with our next webinar. Have a good afternoon.